Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 349. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast I can't do the maths, 339 episodes later. Andy Wiseman. Andy, how are we doing?
There you go, mate. Firstly, thanks for inviting me on. Particularly, I've probably had a full head of hair then.
Do you know what? Looking back through the podcast, and obviously when we're looking for guests, I'm always like, there's so many people I've already had on the podcast that I need to get back on. And it's keeping up with it. And before you know it, like we've just been saying there, 6 years have passed.
Yeah,
And obviously we're going to get into it, but a lot of different roles and clubs and all the rest of it as well. So no, it's great to have you back on, mate.
thanks. I
Um,
appreciate it.
let's start. Let's go back. Let's go back. So give us a bit of story, bit of background, bit of backstory on yourself to start with.
Yeah, so I guess so. I started off as a player. I had some really bad injuries. I went over to Ireland. I had a few attempts at playing again there, but my ankle was not really having it. So I got into coaching. I'd been coaching since I was 16. I was in my 30s then, and I took on the PFA sports science degree, which I have to say I didn't finish. And I set up my own little coaching academy and everything. And then I came back to the UK. I was playing with some mates, got injured again, broke my leg quite severely, and which I thought, right, I'm gonna go back to uni. So I went back to Manchester Met, and they were like, "We'll let you back on a lovely lady called Veronica Parkinson, who's no longer with us, but she was like, I'll let you back on." And actually, some of my lecturers, when I went back, are still mentors and incredible friends of mine. Um, so yeah, I completed that, and while I was doing my degree, I obviously had a few contacts in football. So I went down to the likes of Charlton, Stevenage, and I was, helping out there. And then I got a call and asked if I was interested to going up with Celtic in the women's team, which would have been 2015. So the women's football at that time was probably not as big, and I'm sure we can talk about that. Ended up staying there just under 3 years, developing the program there, sort of a hybrid between SSC and sports science. There wasn't many of us there now full time. It wasn't quite like that at that time, but we had great staff and good support. And then I took a role in League Two with Exeter, so I went to the other end of the country, which was brilliant. I've still got a lot of friends there, and a lot of ex-players that we still talk, and coaches that I met along the way. So yeah, I was there for a year, and I moved to America. So I'd always actually wanted to work abroad, and there'd been a few seeds planted, and I was asked if I wanted to go into the NWSL. At that time, the NWSL and the women's game had like a 5 month off season. So for visa purposes and to stay in the country, I actually ended up working with Real Salt Lake on what would be our off season in their academy, which now I think they have the MLS Next Pro, and it's a lot more common to have club academies. But I think Real Salt Lake were probably one of the first. They had boarding and schools and everything. So I would take any of the age groups, really, 18s, 14s, in that off season, and back to the NWSL. So they then extended the league out, the NWSL, which meant the off season would have got shorter. But then we were hit with a pandemic, quite obviously unsuspectedly. We were actually the first league back in the world to play. So we played a tournament which was televised, and maybe not publicised is probably a better way to put it. But again, that brought a lot of challenges with protocols, playing every few days in heat. The first games were on at 10 in the morning, and the next game would be at 7 p.m., depending on what time you played. So that affected training and everything. So at the end of that season, the franchise was sold. There was a lot of issues within the club, and some things within the league that went on, which were, at that time, I'd started my PhD as well while I was in America. But I was offered the chance to go and work for OL Reign, which were part of Lyon at that time, who were obviously hugely successful in the women's game. So I moved up to Seattle, which was, another experience. Because 3 weeks into the job, I was taking a warm up and I happened to just fall on the floor, which was to a lot of people's amusement. Couldn't really work it out. I was struggling to get my keys in the door and all these things were going on. And then one night I woke out in the most horrific pain. The doctor at the club, for some unknown reason, phoned me at, I don't know, 6 in the morning, and I was taking myself to the local hospital, and it's like, don't do that because insurance, I'll see you. And he managed to get me some medication. So I got a scan really quickly, and they discovered that, I had quite a serious cervical myelopathy, which luckily our doctor at the time was well renowned. He managed to get me to see a specialist in University of Washington who worked with all the NFL players, a neurosurgeon. And he had said to me how serious this is. And the doctor said to me, it's paralysis or death, was pretty much it. So he said, I'll see you Friday morning. So it had damaged part of my spinal cord, but they had to take out some of the disc and remove that pressure. They went in through my throat and played around, bolted me back together. I continued in the US for that season, but it left a lot of issues, a lot of problems. I struggled with post-op depression, and which I'm quite open about. My PhD was put on hold for a year because of the recovery from the surgery. It was quite traumatic. And then I came back to the UK at the end of 2021 to just be with my family. The travel ban had then ended, and I took a role at QPR, which during that time I wasn't fully healed. I was still. It was a massive surgery that effectively saved my life, but it meant that the recovery time would be. I didn't really understand it, if I'm honest. I did a lot of the rehab myself, and it was very, very long. I lost a lot of power on my left-hand side, a lot of muscle mass. I lost a lot of weight. So I think mentally as well, I wasn't in the right place to take a job where I did. And during that time, the doctors found some other things. And we're talking along the lines of things like multiple sclerosis, and that was a huge shock to me. So I spoke to the guys at QPR and said, I need to get this sorted. So I had 6 months off, which I probably drove a lot of people crazy. Football was not really in my interest at that time, and I got my scans done and everything. Fortunately, the worst case scenario was clear. But I still had to see the neurologist regularly up until last year, where I was given the all clear from everything really. So what I thought maybe secondary, because the operation left me struggling to swallow. Sometimes I would drag my foot. There's all these different things, and they explained it to me that your body's rewiring itself. It's literally trying to get used to what it could do. But for me personally, the most frustrating thing was that I couldn't do what I used to do. And I probably internalized that a lot. I'd gone from playing and injuries and coaching and everything else with some incredible staff and athletes, but I wasn't able to do that. I wasn't able to demo things I couldn't lift in the gym. So anyway, 6-7 months later, there was a part-time role going to Arsenal with the under 14 girls. I thought, oh, why not? And I actually missed the interview because it went into my junk folder. And I was like, oh, no, this is just how my year's gone. But fortunately, they got in touch and said, look, would you like to come down? Went and took a session. And I've ended up being there just over 2.5 years, where I moved to the 21s as a sports scientist because of the new sort of PGA academy, and then supporting all the other coaches and staff over the last 6 to 9 months in different areas and different age groups as well. I've been really lucky to work with the little ones right the way up to the ones that are now gone on to be professionals. So it's been incredible, but I decided towards the end of that I wanted to get back to sort of full-time football and being back in what I really enjoy the most. And so it's been a long journey, but I feel that now the time is right. I've got myself fit again and raring to go again, because it has been frustrating.
No, completely understandably so as well. And I think it's important to dive into this, Andy, because I know your research, your PhD is around mental health for players, but not many people talk about coaches and coach health as well. So
Yeah.
I know there'll be coaches out there. Obviously, it's not likely they're going to be experiencing the exact same sort of injury and things that you've been through, but they might be struggling with something else.
Mm.
Talk to me about that time. And you mentioned the frustration of not being able to do what you wanted to do and that you knew that you could do before. So if there's anyone out there that's experiencing anything similar, what would your advice be?
Yeah, go and talk to someone. So I was extremely isolated because I had no family. I lived in an apartment on my own. I had no furniture when I moved in and I had to have this operation. To the point someone gave me a dog and I had nothing in there. I had nothing in this flat apartment, and it was like so bare. And I saw them recently. Actually, they were playing for another club, and we met up. And they had said to me, "I felt so sorry for you. I had a deck chair, and someone had to come in and feed me and change my dressing for a couple of weeks." So the problem I had was I had no one. I had absolutely no one, no family. They were all in the UK. Everybody was struggling here with the pandemic and, job losses, all these different lifestyle things. Whereas for me, I was like, I've got to get back to work. I've got to be in, but I wasn't talking to people and not being able to do it's like you're up there at one moment and my career was going reasonably well. And then suddenly it's just everything's taken away. And I actually look at it in tandem with players who have had serious injury. And now I understand. I think I've always had an affinity with players with serious injury because I've had serious injuries, but not to the point where it could be career ending or there's all this emotion. So that support is important. And actually what I've found is it doesn't have to be someone within your club. If you could just find someone that doesn't, some of the best conversations I've had with people who have no idea about what we do as sports scientists, S&C, football coaches, they're the best conversations I've had. Because I think listening on the other side, just listening and understanding, not being judgmental. And I had to find people like that. So there was a guy, I'll give him a shout out, Quincy, who owned a coffee shop near me in Seattle, Tacoma, Seattle. And he was a Grammy nominated rapper that owned a coffee shop. And I went there every day and I'm still in touch with him and his family. And, sometimes he was actually doing a PhD in a similar area as me, but more organizational. So I would sit and talk to Q about anything, and that was good. But I was still internalizing things. So I think anybody that does struggle, because we work in such a high pressured environment that it can be easy to dismiss things. But when you start dismissing things, they might come back. If you look at something like depression, it might go away with medication treatment, talking CBT, whatever that is, but it could come back. And these things may come back, and there may be triggers, there may be emotions. We know what football's like as a sport. So I think that connectedness and being together in an environment and understanding each other, and I think the environment is so important. And look, I do think that I don't know what every club does, but I think there could be better support for coaches. There may already be that. I don't know, because I don't know what people have in there. There's always the argument that they may employ a sports psychologist, but some of these things may be organisational and they're different skill sets. So I do know of clubs that have an organisational psychologist. I think it's important to have a support network. And over the last few years, I've professionally and personally, I've got to know who those people are. And I think it's okay to open up. I think it's okay to say, I think for me, I can only describe things as, falling down a dark hole, not wanting to do my job, which I love. I love football. That's what I've known my whole life. And then suddenly it becomes very dark there. And there was one or two people who would come to my apartment and make sure I was okay. And, I fully appreciate that. My situation was probably quite unique because I was away quite some distance and sometimes you don't want to talk. And maybe that was something of mine. So I think understand who your network is. And, if you can find someone that's non-judgmental, and don't be scared to, if you feel you need counselling or whatever, People will understand. And it's the same for athletes when we look at stigma, and that's a big thing in not just football, but elite sport. And I think we need to be a little bit more open. Okay, I'm struggling. I'm struggling here. And what works for me might not work for you. So, I can't advise you and say, well, this was really good for me, because it may not work for you. We're all different, and we have to understand those individual differences. So, yeah, look, if anyone's struggling, look, find me on LinkedIn or whatever, and maybe I can help in some way. I don't know, but and I think I've got to understand it a lot more now.
I think it's brilliant advice, because we obviously talk a lot about networking, the power of your network, but a lot of the time that is within football, and that's football challenges that we're referencing. Whereas when we take the person and the personal challenges, that can be someone that's neutral, maybe not involved in, maybe it's better to not be involved in the sport or the club, because they're looking at completely different. So it's a great point, I think, to make to coaches, and maybe to get them to question that if they have got that person.
I think, so I think it was, I'm not sure, I think it was Liverpool who was saying recently, and obviously the sad news that came out of Liverpool today, and condolences to the club and the players' family as well, because it's all, people there will need support. But I think they were saying that they encourage staff to sit with players, to have a coffee and have a dinner and their lunch and everything together. I don't think that's anything groundbreaking, but I think with athletes, there's about 640. This is a paper published in 2012. There's 640 stressors outside of their day-to-day sporting stressors that can affect them. And we're talking things like these days, social media and people wanting tickets and all these other things that go on. And you could make the argument it's not that much different in staff. Because the pressures outside, we all love our little football bubble, which is great. We all want to be in it, but there are other pressures that are coming out. It could be financial from stakeholders in the club. People won't see that side of it. They think we just give people water bottles on the sideline and do that kind of stuff. So I think, understanding everybody's role as well, and what they're going through. I think just sitting, talking, and maybe, I don't know what you think about this, but maybe after the pandemic, we maybe lost a lot of that. And I think a lot of people struggled, including players. I know the PFA had an increase in players with anxiety or showing symptoms of gambling, anxiety, depression, etc. And that's a key point as well. A lot of our research is only symptom based. It's not saying that people are clinically diagnosed with anxiety and depression. We have to differentiate between the two. But I think that's taken a long time to get that back. That feeling of being, everybody wants to feel part of something. And I think that's taken a while to get back in I'm sure all clubs are the same.
No, 100%. I think when you're looking at it in terms of performance as well, and you'll be able to speak about this, and it's something that I wanted to sort of expand on with yourself, like whether we're coaches or players, we have to feel like we can perform. And we talked in our conference, we spoke about on the podcast about in our roles as performance coaches, a lot of time we set the tone of a session. And if you're not 100% on it at that start of the session, it's going to probably be seen and felt by players and other coaches and everyone else, isn't it?
Yeah.
For you, in your experience, when you went back in, and I know you referenced about the role at QPR, where you said it wasn't quite right at that time. And was that something that you noticed? Was it like, right, I know that I'm physically here, but I'm not able to maybe be where I was in terms of performance from before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a few of the guys at QPR will probably say that. I felt that because of the neurological pathways, I guess, and the way things worked, I wasn't as sharp and I wasn't grasping things and it was confusion. It was like a brain fog. Because I'd had a major surgery, and I've spoken to people that have had I'm really lucky that I've got back in the gym. I try to run a little bit and doing what I can. Some people are so far gone that they lose bowel control and things like that. My surgeon, God bless him, that's what he said. This is why we're going to do it. But I'd sort of, I wasn't where I could be. I just couldn't concentrate. I couldn't pick things up and understand them as well as I used to. And again, that became really frustrating to the point where I was like, I think when I was at OL and then QPR, if I'm not, and I think we feel guilty, and that was a problem. I feel guilty because I'm not giving the best service to these people when actually I'm struggling. It's
Yeah.
not guilty. And I think that's where we try to suppress things and go, I'm not doing the best I can today. And maybe you try harder, you do something, and then frustration builds up and can lead to other things. And I think that's why I felt I'm not the practitioner. I was even starting to doubt, am I ever going to do this again? Am I ever going to get back to where I want to be? And, I used to think I was a little bit sharp-witted and things like that, But you start to think that, is this me? What's going on? Is this ever going to end?
Mm.
I have a really good doctor here back in my hometown, and I'd gone to see him, and he gave me some encouragement. I said, "Oh, I'm doing my PhD," and he said, "You guys are the real doctors." I said, "No, no, you are. You save lives." He said, "No, I don't. I write prescriptions." He said, "But you guys do the research that we that we read."
Yeah.
I'll give over. But just those chats, and you can do this, and having good friends and family that encouraged me to just get back on my feet again. But yeah, I think a lot of that was I'm not giving this service. I can't do what I used to do. So yeah, it was difficult, and I think that's the point where maybe that's just a little bit, maybe that's too far gone. I don't know. Maybe that's gone past the point of no return. But
Mm.
I think again, it goes back to the point of coaches or athletes or SSC, sports scientists, physios. If you are starting to feel that pressure and struggling, then try and find someone to open up to. And I think we shouldn't feel guilty. We're all human. We're all in things together, and I think we've got to be able to say, look, this isn't right.
Well, I think sometimes it's made out that we're in a privileged position, which it is, isn't it? But at the same time, like you say, everyone's still human. So
Yeah.
everyone's still going through struggles and things going on outside, away from training and stuff as well. So that has to be accounted for, doesn't it? So I just really appreciate you breaking that down, because I think a lot of people will listen to that and probably take a hell of a lot from it. And I think the advice of having someone looking at that network and being and just critiquing it a little bit. Okay, I've got people here that I can bounce ideas from on the performance side and the football
Mm.
side. But what about the other side? Are there people there, like whether it is friends or whoever, have you got that? And if you haven't, maybe try and reach out to someone like yourself or whoever it's going to
Mm.
be, and try and create that, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, and that's I think it is 24/7 in some respect, but the way I see it is, imagine what an athlete feels like.
Yeah.
That's my perspective. If I'm feeling like that, which led me along the lines of my PhD, well, what are they feeling like when they're arguably, well, they are in a more pressurized environment than me.
Mm.
So how are they feeling? How are we going to ask them to perform, on the pitch and, do X amount physically when actually mentally they're not right?
Yeah.
Or actually mentally they may be struggling. They're not quite at a point of, depressive symptoms or anxiety or other, God forbid, mental illnesses and these things. So I think that's why I started to look at, God, imagine how they are in the position they're in. So, yeah, I think we've just got to be more open, really. I think things are changing,
Yeah.
but having that one person.
And I love that you've brought it back to the players, because I think the important thing with that is, like I mentioned, us setting the tone of the session. If ours is slightly off, it might impact that session, but we're not on telly performing in front of God knows how many fans, are we? So players get scrutinised on every little thing they do, especially at the top level. So
Yeah.
it's a great point.
Yeah, and you're practically living with people for 10 months a year anyway. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes 11 if you're in the Club World Cup.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you got to, I think a lot that I understand now about the environment that's been created and how staff play a massive part in that. And people are trying to tell you things maybe because they're a bit frustrated or they're not feeling great mentally. And we really can help with that environment for coaches and other staff as well.
What would you say, just to sort of wrap this bit up, Andy, on that, just on that point, what would you say to coaches about creating opportunities for maybe players or coaches, practitioners to have a conversation? Because if people are unaware, they're not necessarily going to bounce into the gym and be like, I'm struggling with this, that, and the other. But we've got to try and create an opportunity for them to maybe bring that up, haven't we? So what would you say to coaches for that, just on advice to create these opportunities?
Yeah, and it's a difficult one because not everybody wants to. I think with something like depression, you're in denial. You know, you don't. When you look at severe mental illness, and I'm talking sort of bipolar, schizophrenia disorders, people don't actually think they've got it, so they don't take medication. And with mental disorders, you know, we look at depression and anxiety. Often somebody will be up there and they'll think, "Oh no, I'm down," and then it's like, "I'm okay," and that can be problematic because people don't recognise those symptoms. So I think when it comes to opening up and talking and creating that environment, that also it can be difficult because not everybody wants to talk to people. But I think you can. I think in the context of the environment you have, I think we can all be open. And if someone knocks on the door to the sports scientist, they can have a chat. There are mental health triaging questionnaires out there, validated questionnaires that can be sent out to see where people are, and they can lead to further action. But also, and we're talking full-time professional football, you will have a doctor as well. Whether part-time or full-time. So, but I think just the lifestyle factors and the pressures that we've got. I take real pride and joy of when I talk to players in the gym and other staff, and they might tell you something like, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I'm here for you. Whether the gym's the right place or not, it doesn't matter really. I think, understanding other people's world is so important. And often it's fair to say people don't understand NSSC or sports science world. So I think we've got a duty to play there to help people understand.
How much of these sort of lessons changes your future approach going into a next role? Is there anything that you think about, like, from these things that you've experienced now working with players? Is there anything you do differently, you do more of, you do less of, just to maybe open up these conversations and give players that opportunity?
Yeah, there's a lot of things actually. And I think that any practitioner will tell you that comes with the experience as well. And a lot of different experiences that I've had, and saw some things that weren't brilliant. And I think, well, I wouldn't do it that way. I'm going to do it differently. And I'm going to work with the players in a different way. And I think for me, more than anything, is just listening, just trying to pick up how people are feeling. And we could talk all day long about the validity of wellness questionnaires, the Hooper one probably being the most distributed. But you know what? Sometimes, how are you? What's going on? No, but how are you? And that was a psychologist that taught me that. It's like we all say, "How are you?" Yeah, I'm great. No, but how are you really?
Yeah.
And that can be done in private, or because I think you want people to know that you're listening, that you're there for them. That's how you build trust.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know if that's a British thing, is it? When people say, like, "How are you?" Like, yeah, I'm good. It's you might not be good, but it's just the reaction.
Yeah, I'm good, mate.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crack on.
I see it this way, and just finishing up on your point there, it is a work environment. So we need to treat it's the players' work environment. So we need to make that as comfortable as we can for them to come into that environment, to be able to flourish. We want to create, and I think that's, as I move into other roles, I think that's in the forefront of my mind. How do I set up people for success to flourish and perform? They may not play, but you know what? If someone goes away from that club and they might be sold or moved on and retire, and so they're given every opportunity to be the best of themselves. And that can mean a lot of different things. Some players are very analytical, some players not so analytical. But I've had players that own or part own like houses, kennels for dogs and things like that. And understanding them and their world outside of. Actually, I met a player recently who said to me, "I no longer think of football as my identity. I've moved away from that now." And I thought, you know what? Because it's your job. and you've recognized that and you're not internalizing it. And I'm not a psychologist, but I thought that was a really good way of them, because I've got other interests and I want people to know about my other interests.
I think that's a challenge as well, isn't it? As soon as you can find that out about players, one, it makes conversations a lot easier because you're not just talking about football, you're not just talking about training. You can actually expand it out to whatever that other interest is. And if you don't know about whatever it is, go and find out about what it is, and then you'll have a bit of a respect there from the player, won't you?
Yeah, yeah, because we I've got mates who are bricklayers, but I don't really ask them what the best, how they build a wall every day.
Yeah.
It's the same with a football player. I'm not going to go and tell them we should be playing this system or that system. It's not my job. I might want them to jump higher, run faster, whatever it is, whatever performance goal we've got. But there's ways of doing that, and you've got to create that environment for people to want to do it, to see the benefit, but to flourish and to get better, and as people and as athletes. And I think sometimes you hear it a lot. Oh, it's a people business. I work in a people business. I always think back to what's the environment like? What's it like day to day?
Yeah, no, really important. But when we were planning this podcast out, I was having a think actually, and it's funny you obviously brought up the Celtic role before, and I think that was when I probably first came across as definitely your work with Celtic, but probably one of the first coaches as well that was starting to share things online, because I remember seeing your work online, and then obviously we did the podcast and stuff after that as well. But that growth now, we were talking what, 2015 was that?
Yeah.
So 2015, we're now 2025. It's the Euros at the minute for the women's team. Talk to us about the growth of the women's game and your experience, because I mean that's 10 years now. So what has been your experience in terms of the growth and the sort of the preparation that's going on within women's football?
Yeah, great question. Well, firstly, the professionalisation of the women's game, both in England and Scotland, the changes that have gone within the leagues and the academies now, and the way they're set up, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I think participation levels are through the roof, which means your talent pool's getting bigger, which means you need more structure, resources. You're getting better players coming through. More people will watch the women's game. A lot of my friends will talk to me about it. Maybe that wasn't the case. There's a greater emphasis, focus. With obviously England did really well in 2022. That raised the profile. So we've got all of these different things put into the mix where the women's game is just going up. And you look at Arsenal won the Champions League. Again, you look at the crowds at some of these games as well. It's just phenomenal. Most teams now are playing at their clubs. We have seen a trend now of women's teams being sold off. But the way that the women's game is, it's sort of season on season changed. There's more physical preparation staff, and rightfully so. I think what we're understanding more, and a lot of this comes from, I went to the UEFA conference in Lugano in February, and Stacey Emmons was doing some presentations there. And I think we now, through her work and many others, we've got a better understanding. Girls mature a lot earlier than boys. So therefore, our physical preparation needs to be different. So we're looking at things. It's still the same game. And, the myth of let's train women like women, I would argue that's maybe a little bit of a misnomer, really. But what we do know is that we can train our younger athletes. We can start at a younger age, arguably with young girls, and maybe some of the well-documented injury epidemics, which actually there's no evidence to say it's an epidemic in the ACL, because over the last 20 years, that rate hasn't actually changed. But what we can do is start to look at how our academies are set up and structured, and the physical support for those players all the way through. That wasn't there probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So that side of it, a greater understanding, the education of coaches, the more people wanting to get into the women's game as coaches and physical preparation staff. So sponsorship and all these things that have now come into it, it's so well televised now. And actually, someone pointed that out about the ACL epidemic as it was reported. Well, one of the reasons is it's on telly a lot more now.
Yeah.
The women's game, so some people pick up on those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, the ACL thing's a slightly different debate, but they're good points. So yeah, it's grown so much. It's there's still a long way to go, but seeing how I think going back maybe 2019, you're starting to see young girls saying, my mate's daughter saying, "Oh, I want to be a footballer." But now that's a reality, and I think that's such a good thing for the women's game and young girls. You see young girls like that, when I was at Arsenal, and then they come along or go to watch Arsenal, and the names on the back of the jerseys, and yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And actually, I will give a lot of credit to staff that have been in the game that long, because obviously I've worked in the men's game as well, and players that were there 10 years ago, and what they've seen and those changes. And they've been a driving force behind that. And academics as well have been a real driving force behind that. So I think it's credit to everyone involved.
Just dive into your experience around the academies as well, because this is a really interesting area, isn't it? Because we've obviously talked there about the successes at first team level with England, with Arsenal, which is obviously amazing. And that then drives attention and the aspirations from all these young players as well. But then that has to be followed up, like you say, with the resources for these young girls to go and develop within the academy system. So talk to us about some of the developments you've seen, especially at academies.
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal as a club in my time there, well renowned for their emphasis across the club on physical support. They're fantastic practitioners in the women's academy, the women's first team, the men's side. They're fantastic resources. But when you look at how the academies are set up here with your emerging talent centres, and in 16 it'll go into, so under 16s, under 21s is known as the professional game academy. That wasn't even there 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You've now got the under 21s in the professional game academy who play multiple games a week. That didn't exist a few years ago. So those changes are outstanding. Straight away you're like, wow, that's changed. You now got midweek games. This has changed a lot in one season. Mm-hmm. What we do have, and it's been discussed a lot recently, is you'll have the under 16s and under 21s. So you've got a lot of players now. There are clubs that want to be self-sustaining and develop these players all the way up to first team level. So again, all of that support, and I'm coming from an angle where I've been very lucky at the women's clubs I've worked with to be supported in the physical side, but from a holistic side, from their technical and tactical coaches, their individual development plans, nutrition, psychology. I think what we're starting to see is people are realizing we can provide this support all the way up for the players, for the women's players, to get them to a first team level. Of course, I guess the caveat to that is that the demands of the women's first team games are now getting higher and higher and higher. We're seeing increases there. We're seeing a lot of increases at international level. Now, is that because research in women's football hasn't been that prevalent in the last few years? That's possible. It's possible we're seeing more, so we're more aware of it, which is also a good thing. So it's an interesting time, but I think we're gradually, and I know the FA do a lot of work with the coaches within the PGA and the emerging talent centres of the professional clubs in education and continuing professional development. The clubs are doing that as well. So I think over the next 3 to 4 years, I think we will see a lot more homegrown players, because clubs now, that's another thing that changed in the last couple of years, is now transfer fees. So with under 21s and academies and across that, now I think Chelsea signed their first £1 million player, I think. So yeah, now we're seeing that as well. It's changed rapidly, which means a greater professionalisation, and the staff that you have in, and you will get more experienced staff.
But with that comes challenges, like we mentioned before, doesn't it? Because when we're talking about transfer fees, when we're talking about televised games and more exposure, tying it into what we were talking about before with the stresses that players face, that now increases, doesn't it? at that level as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we need to be really aware of.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as an overnight success, but it's happened very, very quickly
Mm.
on a, you know, quite a sharp trajectory. You're literally seeing season on season, we're going to show more games now every game. Now you're getting crowds of 50,000, teams getting to the Champions League final and this and that. And I am pretty sure I'll look forward to the physical report from being maybe the geek I am from the Women's Euros,
Yeah.
because, when we look, the difference between 2015 World Cup, 2019 and the last one was more so in sort of total distance doesn't move that much. But when we look at sprint and high speed running, it's gone up. Again, can that be attributed to the context of the game as well? Tactical systems will influence that. So it's an interesting time and a really good time to have been involved in the women's game.
Where do you see that the next big developments need to come? If we're looking strictly, obviously, on the physical side, whether that's academy or first team, if we're going to continue at this sort of rate of progress, which it looks like the women's game is, where do you feel like the big focus needs to be for us as practitioners supporting these players?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's quite a difficult one to answer because everybody operates so differently.
Yeah.
I really do think, and I can't speak outside of, I don't know what I don't know, but I think there needs to be a bit of, and look, the FA are doing great work. I don't know all the work they're doing, but I think we also need to get girls that are younger doing more strength and conditioning work, possibly from the age of 9 onwards. I think that's an area, and like I say, I don't know what every club does, but I think that's really important. And I'm not talking getting them under, Olympic lifting and stuff like that, but there's, being able to control their body in space and time and all these different little animal things and games and that you see. I think that's going to be a real area I think we'll get specialists in that area, like we do in the boys' game. We have early or white, the younger players, you have specialists in that area. So I think we might start to see that a little bit more, because I think if we can get people on that pathway, for you may see players come into the game at 13, 14. They step into a professional club. They've never done any strength and conditioning. Are we opening them up, or are we exposing them to a higher injury risk? You can make the argument we are. So I think we need to get the younger ones and have people in that area developing that side, and and some people really enjoy that with the younger ones. So I'm sure it's very rewarding, but I think that might be a big focus. And also, like I say, I think a lot more clubs are probably looking about being self-sustaining and developing their own players for their first teams.
Yeah, no, great point. Let's take it back to yourself. Talk to us about the sort of PhD process, because I know some people will maybe be looking to do one in the future, maybe going through the process at the minute. Like, what's been the experience so far for you?
Yeah, so mine was really unique because the first couple of years were a taught PhD. So I had assignments, and that was stressful enough, flying across places and typing up stuff. But I got through it, and then went into the research phase of my PhD, where I am now. So yeah, it's been really interesting. I've learned an awful lot. I think it's not so my background is obviously sports science. This is completely different, and I wanted that way. I wanted to do something that was challenging, but I probably would never looked at qualitative research. I wouldn't say I'm a qualitative researcher now, but it's opened my eyes to how that's performed and conducted. And I read a lot more qualitative stuff. What are our players telling us, what their experiences and their lived experiences. So I think I've developed a huge respect for that area of research, understanding that not. I'm probably fair to say I question everything anyway, but I think being more critical in the best possible way. There's a lot of research out there that's published, and that's someone's hard work. And I have a lot of respect for people. But I think you can look at it and go, "That's great, but how does that improve my knowledge? And how am I going to apply that?" Because a huge part of my PhD was the philosophical underpinnings of science, like epistemology and ontology, which I'm not that well versed in. So understanding, how we gain knowledge and the study of reality. So yeah, the philosophy of science and Thomas Kuhn and his works and all those things. But actually, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
How have we come to this decision? How have we actually looked at this to, why have we used this? Why have we looked through this paradigm and not that one? So that side's I think that's been invaluable for me, because again, it's opened my mind and skill set to be able to look at things from different views.
Yeah.
And I'm not perfect at that.
Well, that's always going to benefit within a role, isn't it? Because it's like you say, if you don't just take things as they sort of put out there, you've got to question it and apply it to your situation and your current environment, haven't you?
I met a very well-known professor in Lugano, and we were talking about different things, and I remember saying, "Yeah, I know, but that paper," and said, "See, that's how I can tell you're a PhD guy now." And I was like, "Oh, thanks very much, bro." But that's what it. Yeah, I think it's a way of thinking. It's great to have the title, but I think any person who's been through a PhD will tell you it's a way of thinking. And a philosophy and a way you're going to conduct things to, I don't want to sound too philosophical, to gain truths and things like that. So I think that's made me look at things a little bit more different of, okay, so what's the best way to approach this? Can I apply that to my practice? That's good to know. And there'll probably be more research in that moving further down the line. It's an emerging area. But at this moment, it's probably not viable for me to try and implement that.
Brilliant. Andy, this has been such a good catch up. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I also really appreciate all the honesty around some of the challenges that you face, because like I said before, I think it'll be massively beneficial to the listeners. I know you said about sort of getting in touch. If people want to get in touch, where would you direct people to go to do that?
Probably LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just add me on there. And I will try and get back to people as soon as I can. I'm a little bit stacked out at the moment with some projects I'm working on, but including the PhD. But yeah, look, if anyone wants to reach out, the way I see it is, I'm experienced, might not be the most experienced, but I've been through a lot of different things, and I'm happy to, for people to reach out, and if they just want to have a chat or let off steam, I will do my best to get back to them and just try and support where I can. Really, I think that's an area we probably need a little bit more within practice, a practitioners group where it's not all about, you guys are doing great stuff with the networking, and obviously I know some of the guys that are presented for you, but I think we also need that as well. We could just sit and have a chat, and I've actually learned over the years that we all go through the same challenges, just in slight different iterations professionally. But I think it's everything else, because you have your professional life, but there's a wider life out there, which we also need to acknowledge as well.
100%. I think that will resonate with a lot of people as well. So no, I really appreciate you coming back on. It's been far too long, and we won't leave it as long next time. So it's brilliant to catch up. But again, thank you for being so open and honest with everything you've covered as well. I think it's massively beneficial.
My pleasure. And again, thanks very much for inviting me on. So, and also, like, your guys' support over the last few years has also been very, very good. So I'm grateful for that as well. And I'm grateful for a lot of people that I've met over the years who have been so supportive of myself. And, it's good to know that professionally we still have a network, but I think on the wider scale, we've got to look at things from a different lens.
100%. Thanks, Andy.
Pleasure.